And we are.
Mate, the last couple of times I've done one of these, I've separately recorded an intro and an outro to sort of, sum up what we talked about for the podcast. And every time I do it, I hate it because when I'm not talking to someone, I sound like a knob. So today, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking with Dr. Scott Wustenberg, the wonderful chiropractor from Queensland, the man who knows all. We're going to talk about thyroids. So if you've got any questions, then you can email them into eric@brainandbodyhealth.com.au. Scotty can be found by Googling Optimal Life and he'll come up. Contact numbers are 0733710222. Mate, what's the best email address for you?
It's Toowong,
You there, Scotty?
Toowong. Hello? Are you still
I've got
there?
you now. I think we just... I'm still here. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Again,
obviously, we've got wonderful Brisbane internet connections.
I'm getting a sign flashing up saying poor network connection.
Yeah, well, it's kind of what I figured. Hence, I'm going to get closer to the Wi-Fi.
Oh, beautiful. There we go. Look at that frame rate.
Sure. Okay, so as I was saying, that email address, Toowong, Toowong, @optimallife.com.au.
Beautiful. All right. So this is kind of part 3 in the discussion on how to understand blood work. And we left off last time talking all about livers, which was sort of what prompted me to get back on sulforaphane and a few other supplements that I realised I'd let slack. And surprise, surprise, health took a nosedive. But yeah, today we want to talk all about thyroid. And I'm going to admit that when people say, "Oh, look, my T3 and my T4 is out," I just do the diplomatic. Oh, yes, that can be a problem, but I it's not my strong suit. Thyroids. I know that it should be good, or if it's bad, it can be a problem. I know hypothyroid and hyperthyroid and what that can do, but as far as TSH, T3, and T4, the nuances of that starts to elude me. So let's educate the masses as well as educating me. Scotty, take it away. Talk me through thyroids. And why is it so much of a bloody problem? Every third person's got a thyroid issue.
Well, there's a bunch of really interesting reasons for that. One of which is that thyroid and thyroid conditions are commonly a genetic disturbance that have come from a Celtic family extraction. So Australia is, of course, a wonderful country, the lucky country as we've been called in the past, that, all of the Scottish Highland scallywags, the Irish, the Northern English, the people that were perhaps less desirable in the United Kingdom got put on boats for some reason. Maybe they were less savoury, maybe they stole someone's loaf of bread, there's a bunch of reasons, and shunted off to the colonies. Now, penal colony might have been.
Fair.
Yeah, absolutely.
Must have been a hell of a loaf of bread.
Yeah,
like
maybe
olive and rosemary or something.
Well, yeah.
Fancy loaves.
So what we ended up with is a very, very concentrated population of Celtic people over here. Now, that works fine because back in the day, 200 years ago, we didn't have a lot of things like gluten. We didn't have the concentration of, fluoride or chlorine in the water supply. We didn't have the chemical exposures of goitrogens that slow things down. So that population literally didn't get beat up in quite the same way as our current population of people. So what then occurred is that to start with, it was a really high concentration of everyone was either Celtic or I suppose Aboriginal. And then from there, what we did is back after World War II, we started having an increase of what I assume was called the Australian White Policy or some derivation of that, where we let in a lot of people running away from the ravages of Europe in World War II. And so the concentration of Celts in the environment went down to what's currently about 1 in 3, and about 1 in 3 people in Australia actually have some form of thyroid problem, either hypothyroid, subclinical hypothyroid, or a autoimmune thyroiditis. So that's kind of where we've got to. Now, from there, of course, what we've also done, as I was talking about, is we've got a whole bunch of really clever chemicals in our environment now, such as goitrogens, which are things like soy or, my favorite, kale. We've gone through this recent craze of green juices. Everyone needs to be consuming kale up the wazoo because it's good for you, right? Well, raw kale is full of goitrogens. A goitrogen is a chemical that blunts and slows down the effect of the thyroid, meaning that it blunts and slows your metabolism. So people consuming bucket loads of kale could be really doing themselves a favor and are not just cleaning themselves out, but slowing their weight loss down. Now, that sounds like a plan.
Brilliant. Yeah. Eat kale for weight loss and do those super smoothies. You'll get fit and ripped. Nah. You're going to get fat from hypothyroidism.
That's exactly it.
As well as crappy energy and that's good to know. I'm glad I didn't jump on that bandwagon quite as hard as some of the other people that I see do.
Well, politely put, it tastes like crap raw anyway.
Yeah, look, I had kale in Adelaide. Apparently, because it's a much colder climate, it does taste drastically different. It's not nearly as bitter and
awful,
disgusting as what's grown in the warmer climates. Kale, throw in a bit of bacon. Yeah, in Adelaide, we're talking.
Yeah, fair enough.
Sydney? No, you can have it.
Well, kale chips, when you actually kind of toast them in the oven and put a little bit of cracked pepper and stuff on them, it actually works pretty well. And so there's a bunch of ways of consuming it that aren't a problem. You just have to make sure that these foods are actually cooked in some way to start breaking down the goitrogens that are in it. Now,
okay, so it's more the cooking that makes it less of a goitrogen. So eating it raw is a problem.
That's it.
Whereas cooking it is okay.
Yep.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of where to be looking. The other chemicals, the most common one is soy. Now, the problem with soy is it's all very well to have had it in the traditionally fermented style, tempeh, perhaps miso, traditionally fermented soy sauce. But we have these wonderful food manufacturers, as I've spoken about in the past, who do this great stuff called slyly increasing protein levels in the food products, such as ham or bacon or salami and meat products, so that it can actually be considered real rather than luncheon sausage. So, like, to make bacon has to have a certain amount of protein in it. To have it look lovely and juicy and fresh and pink, what we do is we stick preservatives in it, like nitrates, and we pump water into it to keep it kind of plump and pink looking. And traditional bacon is actually quite dry and quite dull, kind of brown looking, because you've cured it. And that's not what people like to buy. We eat with our eyes, so to speak. So when they pump the water in, what clever food manufacturers do is they'll either pump it in with soy protein or casein, so dairy protein, or wheat protein.
Huh. How come? Is that just volumized? Is that a volume thing?
You got to get the protein level up. So when they stick a
gotcha. Okay.
coarse sampler in, they don't check where the protein came from. They just have to check that it's got X% of protein per gram volume of meat there.
Gotcha. Because if they just pumped in water, that would alter the ratio, and then that is no longer a piece of bacon. That's a water balloon.
A manufactured meat, which is luncheon sausage, which you can't sell in the same way. It's not as profitable.
Good to know. Gotcha.
Same problem for, what's the stuff called? Ham as well, obviously. Now, from there, what we also get as a goitrogen or aggravant of the thyroid is gluten. So my favorite food to harp on about, obviously, I mean, by this stage, people are going, this guy's nuts. He just goes on and on and on about gluten. But gluten, of course, makes antibodies that attack the thyroid and enzymes that help run the thyroid and your metabolism. So it can cause thyroiditis and hypothyroidism in susceptible people. So if you've got any signs of low thyroid, low metabolism, inflammation, autoimmune, especially in your family, so first-degree relatives, if you've got people in your family, a brother, a sister, a mother, father, etc., you really want to start considering that if they have autoimmune, commonly these things are genetic, and if there's any Celtic family history in your background, you may have got the same sort of genes, and eating that food is not for you either.
So when you say autoimmune in that instance, are you talking about like someone who's been diagnosed with Hashimoto's, or are you talking more about people who are having some sort of food sensitivity, like bloating after a meal, and it's sort of not clinically diagnosed as autoimmune, but there is probably a degree of some sort of sensitivity going on? Is that what's end of the spectrum are we talking about in that instance?
In the first instance, we're talking like Hashimoto's thyroiditis, because we know that the gluten moiety, the protein structure, can create an antibody, and that antibody will also attack the thyroid at the same time, because these antibodies are pretty dumb. So they're just a lock and key mechanism. They are looking for a protein structure wherever they find it that has the right fragments that fit its lock mechanism. So, oh, look, there it is in the thyroid. I'll punch that, and we go.
Yeah. Any other goitrogens that we should know about? I mean, gluten, soy, they're big ones. Kale, I'm going to enjoy having a good kale rat later on. Any other big ones that we should know about?
Well, seaweed is actually the other one. So kelp, commonly utilized to get the iodine to help the thyroid and keep your thyroid up. But kelps themselves can actually contain a whole bunch of goitrogens that don't do you any good. So you're potentially damned if you do, damned if you don't.
So with kelp being like a seabed, food source, is that from a sort of heavy metal build-up in that level of the game, or is it, because I'd imagine if that was the case, it'd be the same thing for any sort of, crab and bottom-dwelling sea life that we're eating?
Well, it's not. It's still, again, specifically for chemicals like bromine, fluoride, etc., that will actually slow down and blunt the effect on the thyroid. However,
Gotcha.
Heavy metals such as mercury or lead or nickel, aluminium, cadmiums, etc., can all drive negative inflammatory cycles and autoimmune antibody production to human tissue. So if you're consuming things that have high levels of heavy metals in them, and all metals are heavy, so to speak. So I don't know why it's referred to that way, but that's what it is. It kind of makes you think about a
sinister.
Yeah, rock group like Iron Maiden, Megadeth, yeah, heavy. So any of those guys can actually create these molecular mimicry situations and bind to your own tissue and set off an antibody cycle. Cadmium's particularly good. It'll knock out selenium. Mercury will also knock out zinc and selenium, and anything that can do that will cause us problems. Lead can knock out iron, and iron's essential for actually creating the thyroid hormones. And if you get too low in basic things like iron, tyrosine, zinc, selenium, B vitamins, you just can't make thyroid hormones, and you get these subclinical situations anyway.
So with the heavy metal impact on thyroid conditions, is it more through the sort of systemic effect of that heavy metals have on inflammation rather than some sort of localized effect on the thyroid?
Generally speaking. So depends on what sort of inflammation and where it is. So basically all of the heavy metals want to get stored and put into your back pocket, so to speak. So the body gets exposed, it gets into the bloodstream. From the bloodstream, the body says, this stuff's awful. We don't want this stuff anywhere near our tissue. So let's hide it away somewhere else where we can sequester it and stop it affecting us. So the problems with things like lead is it likes to live at the end of long bones, and it replaces things like calcium in the bones themselves. Yeah, and knocks out stuff like B12. Well, this is part of the problem, because you take an X-ray of someone's bones and it looks like it's full density because it's full of lead, but the person's brittle as and will break as soon as you put them under stress.
Interesting. Okay.
Small issue.
X-rays look all right, but you're still cracking like a toothpick.
Yeah.
Too much lead.
Quite possible. So mercury likes to live in fatty tissue, as does a lot of the other metals. Its favorite fatty tissue is the...
Really? In the brain?
In the brain.
Of course it is. Oh, of course. Yeah. Bloody
aluminium.
mercury.
Aluminium likes to go there too. And so your biggest source of that one, surprisingly, is actually probably your water supply. Aluminium fluxes in there all the time.
I had a like super geek out phase a week or two ago where I was looking at some research data where they were using casein as a molecule getting through the blood-brain barrier, and they were saying, okay, look, this is the blood-brain barrier. This is what makes it permeable. Actually, I think it was a temperature fluctuation. So they were heating up brain tissue and then seeing at what point casein would end up in the brain. And then I'm like, oh, yeah, cool. So that looks like at about 0.5 degree of tissue change in the brain, your blood-brain barrier starts to get permeable enough to let milk in. Let's just see how big milk is compared to some of the other stuff that's in our diet. And it turns out like milk is enormous compared to aluminium. Aluminium is like sneaky little bastard.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Tiny.
Really, really small.
Like that's going to be like the tiniest little bit of permeability in your blood-brain barrier. And that's getting in there.
Yeah, you've got to worry about something more significant than that. Okay, so the heavy metals are actually quite big in the grand scheme of things. Okay, what you have to then worry about is what molecules are we exposed to in our diets and food supplies that are smaller and harder to detect. Think solvents, herbicides, and pesticides.
Oh, okay. Glyphosate groups.
Yeah, glyphosate. Oh, but there's bunches of them. Paraquat, dildrum, DDT. You know, we've been using these things for, I don't know, the last 70, 80, 100 years. They're all over the place. You know, just think where you live in Sydney, they probably fogged and sprayed in mass areas all through Sydney to knock off mosquitoes.
Yeah, they did just up the road. Quite substantially. Actually, I think I read something interesting where they were doing like a tissue biopsy in just your everyday American, and it was something like 20 times more DDT than 50 years ago or something like that.
Most likely.
Yeah, surprise. Oh, look, brain problems are on the rise.
This stuff's got into our water supply, so we're drinking it as well. And again, you know, while we can assume that the municipalities are actually cleaning our water and taking the bad stuff out, the average one of us has no real idea exactly what's in it because they never tell us. They just tell us it's safe for consumption.
Stick to bottled water.
Well, yeah. Try not
Well, yeah, that's got its own set of problems with the bloody plastics. Can't win.
Yeah.
Boil your own water in something that's not aluminium container.
That's it. So
let's circle back. So for the listeners, let's run through like what would be the symptoms someone would expect to say if someone didn't know they had a thyroid issue. What would you feel if you were low thyroid versus high thyroid versus Hashimoto's?
Okay, so for a low thyroid and subclinical hypothyroidism, things that you might kind of expect to feel might be tiredness, fatigue, weight gain, difficulty losing weight, brain fog, dry skin. We might see the outer third of your eyebrow starting to be lost, which is called Hertog's sign.
Frantically stroking my eyebrows to see if I'm one of them.
So you just feel kind of this low-grade malaise, and you sort of don't really get better no matter what you do. You tend to also feel a lot of these signs if you are also hyperthyroid. The difference with hyperthyroidism, though, is the exact opposite. You don't tend to be able to hold on to weight. You become quite skinny in these instances. You can get your eyes starting to bulge out on stalks, so to speak, eyelid retracting back, and that kind of, what do you call it? Exophthalmosis, I think is how it's pronounced. But, you know, people have these big bulgy eyeballs poking out like there's a lot of pressure behind them. Low weight, again dry skin, like snake skin. When you push on it, it kind of crinkles, and so people say, well, you're deficient in essential fatty acids, have some more fish oil, because that's kind of one of the typical things that we get to see with it. And none of these things are quite true. Now, something like Hashimoto's will give you potentially either set of signs, because Hashimoto's is more about making antibodies to the thyroid or the thyroid hormone or receptors and stopping the conversion. So if you're stopping the conversion from T4 to T3, you can get all of the hypothyroidic signs. If it's making antibodies to the end product, you're still going to make lots of it. It may not work for you. So the body is trying to make more and more and more, and then you get these more inflammatory mixed signs. So with someone with hypothyroidism from a Hashimoto's thyroiditis situation, they can be either hypo or hyperthyroid, depending on where they are in any one cycle or what medication is given to them.
And that cycle is dependent on inflammatory exposure rather than some sort of cyclical thing?
That's exactly it. So commonly, they will get diagnosed as hypothyroid, and they will be given thyroxine or oroxine or some form of T4 medication, and this drives up their thyroid function to some degree, and this drives the body to produce more antibodies because there's other mitigating factors such as the celiac disease in the background and a bunch of other autoimmune conditions, and so this makes everything much, much worse. Now, one of the really fun things that the listeners need to know is that 60% of all supplemented thyroid hormone, all T4 thyroid hormone, which is your oroxines, thyroxines, will convert to this thing called reverse T3. Or RT3. Now, reverse T3 is sort of like a hibernating chemical. It causes the body to temper the effect of the thyroid hormone. So it can also, when it goes up too high, make you feel tired and slow and thick in the head and foggy and dry skin, etc. So you cannot win from supplementing thyroid hormone, and you need to speak to your doctors about getting a trial of perhaps compounded T3, which bypasses the T4 and the reverse T3 completely and allows the system to come up. But it puts a blunting effect on TSH production, and it'll suppress the TSH down to less than 0.5. And for some reason, the medics all seem to get really concerned about this. I've never really understood why they get so concerned about, oh my goodness, we've suppressed TSH. Yeah, that's what we were trying to do. We were trying to give the thyroid a holiday at that moment in time because you were making antibodies to the thyroid from the production of T4 in the first place.
Gotcha. So as far as diagnosing, like how would you find out if you definitively have Hashimoto's? Is that like is there a test for that, or is it more on response to medication that you say, oh no, we diagnosed you with hypothyroidism, put you on the meds, and you went bonkers? You've probably got Hashimoto's.
No. It's all of it's entirely done these days by serum levels of either antibodies or levels of T3, T4.
Finally, a condition where you can definitively get an answer. That's nice.
No.
Brilliant. Okay.
Okay, so that's how it's definitively diagnosed. And then, of course, with these autoimmune thyroids and hyperthyroidisms, they definitely do ultrasounds of the thyroid to actually look for goiters and hot spots and thyroid cancer. And, if it's bad enough, they'll remove your thyroid and leave you on medication for life, which, not a great thing, but sometimes it's in the best interest of the patient. We used to traditionally kind of ask the patient how they were feeling, what the symptoms were like. Nowadays, we're very much pro testing the blood levels and going, right, well, we've got your thyroid hormone T4 at 16. That is nicely in the metabolic range. You're fine. Aren't we clever? Your TSH is kind of 2.3 and T4 is 16, and the patient comes in, yeah, but I'm still tired. I've got headaches. I can't think clearly. I can't remember what my own name is. Yep, no, sorry, but we've done our job. We've supplemented you effectively. Your thyroid hormone level is fine. You're fine. Go away. And so there's no great situation because of the current medical uses of the blood testing. The specialists tend to be a bit more precise about this. I think the situation is basically encumbered by this risk factor that as soon as the average GP in Australia is doing something that's outside the Medicare realms, testing too much, prescribing T3, raising the level up above what is physiologically considered the perfect range. So what we have as a situation is individuality of someone's biochemistry and physiology. The bigger you are, so literally, without being offensive to anyone, the fatter you are, which goes along with being very hypothyroid, the more vitamin D and the more T4 you need to actually saturate the body to get the T3 to work. You've got to have the right level of cortisol in there. You've got to have low levels of inflammation so it stops interfering with the receptors. So there's all these other reasons that will interfere with the amount of T4 bioavailability to convert into an active T3 hormone. So it's never ever as simple as I have the right level of T4 in my bloodstream. Aren't we clever? So yeah, I wish it was that simple.
So with anyone with, a thyroid issue where we should be talking to like a specialist to get appropriate compounded concoctions put together for you, are you talking about a endocrinologist, or are you talking more about an integrative doc who's done the sort of more integrative medicine style study?
Well, that really depends on where the person sits, how comfortable they are, and what sort of practitioner that endocrinologist or integrative doctor is. So I tend to refer more to integrative doctors, mainly because my results with patients tends to have found that those people have more open-minded and perhaps up-to-date training. Now, that's clearly just my experience. That's not necessarily the general rule. The people in Sydney may be very different to the people in Brisbane. We're very conservative up here, and we tend to go with, this is what the blood markers should be. That's all we're going to try and prescribe to. We've got you feeling crappy, but your numbers are right, so that means you're fine. Hopefully the patients in and around Sydney or Melbourne might have a different experience than a lot of my patients have had here. So I tend to use a variety of more integratively trained physicians who are going to look more at, their allergy content, lifestyle changes, how their exposure to xenoestrogens and goitrogens are going to be affecting it, whether that patient actually has another complicating autoimmune effect that's going to create other issues for us. Like the more autoimmune effects we have, celiac disease, Sjogren's syndrome, etc., the more issues we're going to have with that thyroid function.
That was going to be my next question. I mean, how often do you see thyroid issues in isolation? It's usually going to be, okay, you've got liver problems and brain problems and gut problems. And
that's entirely it. And people will have compensated till they start to decompensate. So fundamentally, my golden rules are everybody breaks, and all problems are in some way a resource management issue. If you had the resources to do it better, you would. So you start throwing all your resources at the problem, and then you start running out. So you kind of steal from somewhere else, and then say the liver starts dysfunctioning, and then you start stealing from somewhere else, and then kind of your adrenals start to misfire, and then slowly you get all these other problems that go with it that could have been dealt with if the person had been on kind of a better diet and lifestyle factor. So it really comes down to looking at all these other factors and not just going thyroid in isolation.
Are there any common, so when you're talking about like you compensate for a problem somewhere else and then that starts to overload and break and then, hey, thyroid problems. Are there any common precursors that you usually see that say, hey, if you don't watch this, you can have a thyroid problem down the line? Like if someone's got dodgy liver levels, or answer that question for me. Any sort of precursors that you would say there's a fire that's about to start? Let's do what we can to sort it out.
Well, I'd always be looking at their infection history. Some of the really interesting viral loads, like previous mononucleosis cytomegalovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, will likely lead to an issue with thyroid metabolism, 10, 15 years down the track. Stress patterns is always a go. So if you don't have enough appropriate levels of adrenal hormones, cortisol especially, or vitamin D, you cannot convert T4 to T3 and actually activate it in the system. If you don't have a good functioning detox profile, you can't actually clear out a lot of the chemicals that will actually slow down the thyroid, the goitrogens per se. Further, if you have too hyperactive functioning of the thyroid because you upregulated it from excessive alcohol or drug exposure, your thyroid could be at risk because you're going to clear out your hormones too quickly.
Oh, interesting.
It's all about the Goldilocks moment. Everything's got to be just right. If you've had allergies in the past, if you kind of know that you've had like a gluten allergy, a wheat allergy, if you've had problems with sulfur vegetables in the past, we're probably likely to see some problems with the thyroid, more likely to start later on. If the person has some malnourishment issues, if they don't have enough protein levels going in, because everyone needs to keep in mind, because it's so common. Everyone says, "Oh, you got to reduce your animal proteins because those things are bad for you." I get so frustrated with this. The basis of all of your thyroid hormones, the T is tyrosine, which comes from phenylalanine. Now, again, you can get this from vegetable sources. Don't let me say you can't. But like I hear people giving their patients detox programs, which is remove the protein and get them on more vegetables. It's like, yeah, but more vegetables might be causing kind of blocking of the thyroid, and you now no longer have enough protein for detoxification or making the thyroid hormone in the first place, let alone the fact that you need cholesterol to make the vitamin D, and without the vitamin D, you can't make the thyroid hormone work. So what are your best sources of cholesterol going to be coming from if you don't make it yourself?
Well, meat.
Yeah. Animal protein. Eggs. Yeah. Eggs are a great source.
It kind of goes back to the days of when you say, oh, your cholesterol's up, you better cut out the eggs and fatty meat from your diet because that'll fix that.
Yeah, except for your body always requires it because it's essential for hormones and it's essential for making your brain work properly. Your cholesterol's a membrane kind of anchor to keep everything moving properly in your neurons.
So, if there's any issue with, if you've got any of those big viral infections in your history, watch out for thyroid. If there's any sleep hygiene issues where you've got insomnia or sleep's not appropriate, watch out for thyroid down the track.
Absolutely.
Stress levels, watch out for thyroid. And any of food allergies, watch out for thyroid. I think out of that list, I've got 3 out of 5.
Good stuff.
So I'm kind of excited to pee on a magic strip for you, mate. I just got that Dutch test in the mail.
Brilliant.
It came out this morning, so I'm going to be peeing on a strip for you, and then we're going to... Is that one of the things that it's going to test out? Tell me if I'm thyroid problems, or it's going to look at... what's this Dutch test look at, mate?
So the Dutch test is going to have a look at your cortisol and cortisone levels. It'll look at your sex hormones, DHEA, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen levels, how you convert them, turn them on or off in the system. It'll look at fundamentally how stressed you are, what your sleep cycles are like, whether you are making the cofactors or the downstream factors from serotonin, dopamine production, whether you're sleeping well, whether your melatonin's building up at the right time in your system. So it's a fairly comprehensive thing looking at how good is your repair mechanisms, are you beating yourself up, and some of the factors towards thyroid, but not thyroid directly.
Well, again, I'm excited to pee on a strip for you, mate.
Cool.
And then we'll certainly talk about that result in one of the later podcasts.
Cool.
Mate, anything else we want to talk about for thyroid?
Well, we want to make sure that people are understanding that the thyroid, when they're actually kind of running a thyroid test, generally what occurs is people will run a TSH, and that's the magic thing that the medics will run. And if that comes in the normal range, generally speaking, they don't tend to do anything further. Now, my wife has a diagnosis of Hashimoto's, and her TSH came in normal, came in dead on 2, which is the perfect sweet spot every time we ran it. Yet she had brain fog and dry skin and weight gain and feeling crap. Okay, so in the end, I actually paid commercially to get all the other tests run. So we tested the T4 and the T3 and thyroid antibodies. And so we need to be considering always running those tests independently of whether the TSH is good or bad, because it's not always connected to how things are working. So other tests that you need to be looking at is things like thyroid receptor antibodies and a TPO test, endomysial testing of your thyroid, looking for, are you making antibodies against the thyroid receptors, the thyroid tissue, the enzymes converting from T4 to T3, because how you treat the patient will differ depending on where any negative effect is going to be. Again, you've got to look at some of those other factors as we were talking about. Are they hyperstressed? Because some of these people will show up with low levels of thyroid hormone. So, you know, the normal range for, say, T4 is, say, 9 to 20. Okay, and the patient might show up with a 10, which is technically normal. They feel rubbish. Their TSH is 2.2 to 2.5, so not too bad. It's slightly raised, but nothing that's going to make anyone step up, because, of course, it's got to get up above 3.5 to 4 before a medical probably consider it an actual issue. But it's not really the thyroid's fault. It's a secondary effect because the other factors are driving that thyroid down. And this is where you've got to look at the diet and the stress levels and the goitrogens. The other thing you've got to understand is, of course, that the thyroid is on a seesaw with the parathyroid. And the parathyroid controls your calcium deposition, and parathyroid hormone therefore does that. So if the thyroid's up, parathyroid can be low. If the parathyroid's up, thyroid can be low. So if you've got one being low function, check the other one to make sure it's not having an autoimmune condition attacking that. Because again, it's not always the thyroid's fault that it's dysfunctional.
Okay, so you could have a parathyroid autoimmune issue that's upsetting thyroid, not necessarily directly through the autoimmune issue affecting thyroid, but through the back door with parathyroid.
Correct. Now, of course, one of the other major things that we, as chiropractors and health practitioners, need to be considering is that the pituitary gland and hypothalamus are the root sources of all these hormones. So I've got a patient who's just had a MRA done today because she has low-level subclinical autoimmune thyroid with a low-level positive parathyroid for autoimmune, chronic headaches, and so we're just making sure that there's no physical mass swelling or disturbance in her skull that's actually like a pituitary adenoma or otherwise that's actually driving antibodies or issues from much higher up.
Interesting one.
So, look, I'm ever hopeful that it's not, but because she's so chronic...
Still want to check it, though, Jesus.
Yeah, well, that's it. So, not always are these things, physiological. Sometimes there's actually a structural issue. Just imagine if she had calcification of her pituitary. So something as simple as that, if we were doing a lateral view headshot and we hadn't collimated out sella turcica, you're going to see an issue, either an enlargement or a calcification or otherwise on that sort of x-ray. So good things for the chiropractors who might be listening to this or any other health professionals to be double checking at that moment in time.
Yeah, that's a good call. So in summary, if you feel like you've got thyroid issues, but your basic thyroid tests are coming up negative, push for the more advanced thyroid tests like your T3, T4, TSH. And then, so those other tests that you were mentioning, that seem sort of like third tier, can they be done through a GP, or is that a special lab?
No. Any GP can run these tests. They just have to choose to and have a good clinical rationale to do so. And that's usually where the problems sort of come about, because standard training says TSH is really the answer. If it's not that, this is where they tend to want to refer to endocrinologists, because it's a bit too time involved, perhaps, for their,
Well, which is fair enough when they got people banging down their door looking for antibiotics because they're all sick and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
I wouldn't want that job in a million years. Okay, push for the specialist, people. If you've got thyroid problems or think you've got thyroid problems and the tests come up normal, you probably still do have thyroid problems. You just need to find someone to test it properly.
That's it.
Nice.
Yep.
Mate, what's next on the list? So we're working our way through a blood test. We've gone through anemia, we've gone through liver, we've talked about thyroid. What's our next big one to combat?
Well,
we've got to talk white blood cells at some stage, sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We can probably have a look at allergy testing and the immune system next time, and then at some point get on to the hormones, adrenals, and their effects on things, especially the effects on the brain. So all of those things, why don't we talk about the immune system and hormones' effect on the brain, and it's probably another 2 or 3 parter.
That's going to be epic. Well, again, I'll look forward to peeing on a couple of sticks for you, and then we can talk about those results and correlate those with the QEEG that I got done on myself the other day, and say, oh yeah, look,
excellent.
Biochemically, you're there's reasons why your short-term memory is what it is.
Yeah, well, that's going to be pretty interesting. And the good news is that we can use that as a live case, that we can say, right, well, look, Eric, you've got this metabolite really low, this metabolite really high. I'm going to get you to take these supplements and do this for this period of time. We're going to do this with your sleep hygiene. And then we can go back in 6 months and do a follow-up and compare and contrast the two and see exactly how it's going at that moment in time.
I love it, mate.
Yeah.
Test and retest.
Well, it's the only way forward, because the biggest thing is, especially, like I've got a bunch of patients who have this wonderful situation called PANDAS, which is a autoimmune pediatric strep problem. And of course, the standard medical testing says, oh, well, look, you've got antibodies, you had a strep infection. Those things aren't going to come down, and it causes major amounts of trouble. Now, they don't come down quickly, but if you're treating the person effectively, you should see a change in the antibody levels in 2 to 3 months of treatment. So retesting is imperative for anything. Never assume. Get it done, even if you have to pay for it yourself. One of the biggest problems that I see, and no offense to anyone who's deeply involved or has different opinions, but Australian public has become strongly dissociated with personal responsibility for their own health because of Medicare, because of insurance and public health systems, which tend to take the largest amount of cost out of our testing and treatment, which is great. I love it. But it also takes some of the emotional responsibility of suffering out of it. If you don't have to pay for something, you also don't tend to want to push for getting the right answers. And the next issue is that we tend to therefore rely on our experts who may not really know to be more knowledgeable and go, oh, well, the doctor said X, so they must be right. I won't do any further follow-up because they said I'll be fine. But you don't feel fine. Well, no, but the doctor said. So you have to be proactive. You have to push to get the testing, because doing an 8-day course of antibiotics may not solve the issue. And just relying on a couple of blood point tests to check that your T4 level is right may not make you feel any better whatsoever.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate situation. You got to shop around and push, and it's not just as easy as getting the results you're looking for. No, it's always down to education, and the problem always is that the current level of education and research is about 20 years ahead of the practitioner at the coalface in most cases. So, actually, did you see? I think Brett Giroz posted he did something about that where he was showing that it takes 17 years for 34% of the clinical knowledge to be taken up in a clinical setting.
Yeah,
So
that's not good.
34%.
Yeah, not good. So hopefully it gets easier from there. And I think basically they show it's 20 to 30 years to get from the researchers and the specialists down to the people at the bottom of the food chain, which is you and me and the medical GPs.
I'm going to tell quite a funny story because I posted and you saw it, a video on Instagram that was just a quick chopped up, showing what I would do for a shoulder case. And we had a quick demonstration on this is the movement problem. And then we did some electrical work. We did some soft tissue release. We did some adjustments. And then I posted that. And then, let's just put out to the world that, evidence-based chiropractic, this is where we're at.
Awesome.
And
didn't you get trolled?
Yeah, I did. This bloody troll came in and I read half of it. I mean, I was driving at the time. I probably shouldn't have, but I was quickly checking Insta and I saw this bloody comment and it was, what a shoddy practitioner. And I got furious, blocked the son of a bitch and deleted the comment and now I was in a foul mood. And you know what? I was just about to write back some rather horrible things. And then I found out it was you cheeky bugger.
You should have. I mean, would have started a...
I was thinking dark thoughts, mate. These bloody trolls, they set me off. I was getting right ready to say things about how you're a disappointment to your family and all that sort of thing.
That would have been totally true.
That's you should find out more about the cheeky little troll mate that turns out to be Scotty on the other end of an innocent looking Instagram handle.
Well, yeah.
For anyone listening, if Cool Dad trolls you, then no, it was bloody Scotty.
Yeah, I'll own that.
So yeah, but the reason why I'm telling that story is, it's funny how when you're following the latest and greatest from an evidence-based approach, you're viewed as the guy that's no longer evidence-based. There's no evidence to support that. It's like, well, actually, there is.
You just haven't read it.
Read it, and there's no support for laser. Bugger off, you butt. Anyway, so that's
there's 7,000 different kind of research papers when I did a search on laser and pain. Not all of them are in human models, obviously, but there's huge amounts of it. What I found really interesting, I did a couple of months back a presentation to a group of medical doctors on it. And what I found in my researching of laser just by itself is that laser has been accepted in Eastern and Western Europe for about 40 years and is part of every standard discipline of medicine in use over there. It's a go-to. Whereas in the Western world, Australia, New Zealand, America, it's newfangled and oh my goodness, there's not enough evidence for that. And it just shows the absolute difference. I suspect that one comes down to that laser is cheap as a therapy. And countries like, say, Russia, for instance, haven't had the financial drive. China hasn't had the financial drive behind their medical system compared to like the American system. So the American system's got squid loads of money, but it's all going into pharmaceuticals that had a large, quick financial return to them. Whereas, the Chinese market, for the volume of people they have to keep well, they just don't have the money per capita to waste time with failed experiments, etc. So they're looking for things that are going to actually help their patients much quicker, much cheaper per capita, that actually get people well. Same thing in Russia.
I hadn't thought about it that way.
And this is, I think, why the more Eastern bloc, and I'm using China in that section of the world, has gone very strongly into these modalities. Their publishing level is huge. China's got one of the biggest publishing models in the world, full stop, bar none. But, we turn around in Western allopathic medicine and go, oh, there's no evidence for that. No evidence for Chinese medicine. Of course there is.
It's not in English. I'm not going to read it.
No.
It doesn't count unless it's written in English.
Oh, just really frustrating. And that just shows our narrow-mindedness. If anything, you could call us all a little racist, I think. Now, I find it difficult looking at some of those papers because Google Translate's not all that wonderful, but
can be a bit difficult sometimes, yeah.
Yeah, but it's still there. It's just up to us to kind of work with people to explain it to us.
Have you ever seen some of those snapshots where there's been an auto translate on Star Wars, and then so there's been like they've turned it into Chinese, and then they've done an auto, so like the voiceover is in Chinese.
Yep.
And then there's just like an auto cue translate back into English. And so the translation from Chinese back into English has come up with some, anyway, Google that, mate. It's a good half hour of giggles.
That's an awesome idea.
Mate, I think we better start wrapping up. I've got the receptionist is banging on my door.
Well, I've got to start continuing my writing towards my pain seminar I'm giving to the CAAQ this weekend.
Oh, this weekend? I was going to ask you when that is.
Yeah, this weekend we're looking at catastrophization and where some of this behaviour has come from, and how there was a dichotomy split back in 1914 of turning us into a religion. That should go well.
Ruffle some feathers.
Well, look, if I'm not having people wanting to stand up and punch me in the face by the end of it, I'm probably not doing it well enough.
Mate, that's a good goal. It's a good goal. Just duck and weave. You got your jiu-jitsu skills. You'll be right.
Take him down.
Yeah, take him down. Get him to the floor. Just hope they don't have a mate who's going to stomp on your head while you're down on the... Mate, again, this has been... I always learn a lot. Thank you for taking me through thyroids. And for anyone listening, if you've got a thyroid problem and you want to talk to Scotty, you can catch his email address, which is toowong, TOOWONG, at optimallife.com.au. Again, Scotty and I, we're not medical doctors. We're chiropractors, but obviously we've got a passion for research, and we've done a shitload of research in a whole manner of things. But yeah, if you want to get in touch with Scotty, that's his number, or 0733710222. If you've got any questions for me about the podcast or anything like that, Eric at brainandbodyhealth.com.au. But otherwise, guys, listen for the next one, where we're going to talk about, what did we decide we're going to talk about?
Adrenals and immune system.
Mate, that's another
huge
big one.
Yep.
Big one. All right, guys, thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching. To learn more from Dr. Scott, visit our site at optihuman.com.au.